everyone, welcome to Post Ugly, a community where we talk to mental health professionals and survivors of trauma and abuse, and we kind of talk a little bit about life post ugly, post trauma. Today on the show, we have Oceana. She is a survivor of the Christian fundamentalist cult known as ATI, also known as IBLP. She is here today with us to discuss a little bit about her life post ugly and kind of tell us a little bit about how it's been for her. So, welcome to the show, Oceana. Thank you so much for being here.
You for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So, we kind of just wanted to go into your upbringing a little bit. Just give me a little brief summary about how you grew up and how this cult affected your life.
Okay. Well, I grew up in the Midwest. I grew up the fourth born of seven kids. And like you said, my parents raised us in a Christian fundamentalist cult. They both grew up, well, my mom grew up non-religious. Her parents were atheists, and then my dad grew up Catholic. And so they really wanted to do something different for us kids and give us the life that they didn't get to have, with that sense of family and a relationship with God. So my mom actually converted to Christianity when she was a teenager, and then she had an influence on my dad, and he converted from Catholicism to, I guess, evangelical Christianity. They went to a Lutheran church. My dad, he was a computer engineer, and my mom, she was a nurse. And once they started having kids, my mom homeschooled all of us and kind of ran the household. She was a stay-at-home mom. Yeah, so we grew up kind of very isolated, very sheltered. We lived kind of out in the country. It was a couple miles outside of the city limits on like 3 acres. And then it was like surrounded by woods and cornfields. So it felt much bigger than it was. We were able to like roam all over. And in some ways, it was kind of magical and kind of almost an idyllic childhood. But then also, on the other hand, we were involved in this cult that kind of disguised itself as this homeschooling curriculum. So it was like, it was very weird. It was very odd, kind of like that feeling of life just being very calm and beautiful and surrounded by nature. And then also having this trauma of growing up in a cult and like all the things that came with that.
Yeah, yeah. And you said you're one of how many kids? Seven?
Seven kids total. Yeah, that was another big part of our cult growing up. It was referred to as like the quiverful movement. It's based off a Bible verse where we're supposed to have as many kids as possible.
Were you like on the older side of the spectrum or on the younger side?
So I was right in the middle. I had three siblings that were older than me and then three that were younger than me.
Hmm. And, I wonder because I actually did watch the documentary. There's a documentary right now on Amazon. What was it called? Do you know?
It's called Shiny Happy People,
Shiny Happy
Duggar
People.
Family Secrets.
Right. And I was watching that and one thing that stood out to me was is that the older siblings kind of had to take care of the younger ones. Did you feel that way? Did you have to do that as a child?
A little bit. So in this cult, there is a lot of parentification that goes on just because the parents, due to the large number of kids that they have, they just can't take care of all of those kids. So they have to, what they call it is a buddy system, and they pair up an older sibling with a younger sibling. So my buddy that I was paired up with was the brother that was older than me, the next in line, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
So I mean, I took care of my younger siblings a little bit, especially my youngest brother, since we were all much older when he came along. He was kind of the surprise baby at the end after my parents thought they probably wouldn't have any more kids or
Mm,
physically be able to. So I took care of him a lot, and I enjoyed that. I really enjoyed taking care of him and like feeding him bottles and playing with him.
yeah.
But I do remember at times it being kind of stressful having to care
Mm,
for him because my mom needed to like homeschool my other younger siblings.
right, right. And how old were you when you noticed that like your life was different from other people's lives?
I think I always kind of knew we were different in a sense because I remember being really little and being embarrassed whenever we would like go out to eat or go anywhere because we always wore like such funny outfits. We had the handmade really long skirts and dresses, the handmade jumpers. And I remember anytime we went anywhere, I mean, due to the size of our family and also we did look kind of strange in our outfits. People would always stare. So I remember always feeling a lot of embarrassment with that and always being very aware of people and their eyes on us. But I think when I like really became aware of it was probably when entered my preteen or teen years. I think I was around 13 when I went to confirmation class at our church. And I think that was the point where it was pretty obvious to me. I was very, very different from all my friends. And they would ask me questions like, why do you always wear like skirts and dresses? Why is your family so big? Why aren't you allowed to listen to rock music or date or do things that were considered normal?
Yeah. What is confirmation class?
Pretty much everyone who was around the age, like high school age, 13, around there, we would go through the catechism and the Bible. And basically it was like teaching the church's beliefs. And then you were confirmed at the end, which meant you could take communion every first Sunday out of the month. And confirmation, when you got up on confirmation Sunday, you were kind of essentially proclaiming your faith publicly, saying, this is what I believe. And you were kind of like a member of the church in a sense. I don't think an official member since we were minors, but it was kind of almost like a graduation of sorts where now you can take communion, now you can be a part of the church in a sense. But it definitely wasn't consensual. I remember no one asked me, like, did I even actually believe this? Did I want to go through it? So
Yeah, did you?
no, 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 I just went along with it because that's what you did. And I was too scared to do anything otherwise. Like I would have gotten in huge trouble with my parents if I had said anything like, I don't want to do this. I don't believe this.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So I don't want to go into too much detail, but could you describe a moment where you felt back then that was, a moment of like the ugly for you?
I think it was more just kind of the prevailing theme of my life. There was always so much anxiety and shame. When I look back, I think the dominant theme just from my childhood is shame. And it
Mm.
was so inherent in all of the teachings as well. I think one of the biggest things that sticks out to me with the trauma, I think, was the sexual abuse that was going on for me. And I had a lot of anxiety about going to bed at night. I had night terrors. I would wake up in the night screaming, or yeah, there's just a lot of things going on with that. So I think that was one of the hardest things to deal with.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you mind me asking who was the abuser in your family?
So it wasn't an adult, it was a child. And so to this day, I won't like disclose who this person was or anything like that, just because they were a child at the time.
Mm.
And I truly believe that they didn't know any better. I think the way we were raised, the cult that we were in was very, very misogynistic. It had very traditional gender roles. And we were also taught essentially that women were objects, that women, their only role in life was to basically be a baby making machine, to run a household, raise kids, and be essentially a sex doll for her husband, 100% available whenever he wanted it.
Mm.
And also, it was a very like sexually repressive and shaming type of cult. And so it kind of, I think, bred this unnatural interest in things of a sexual nature. We saw that a lot with other kids, just this very unhealthy, rampant curiosity around sex. And so I think it was more so that just the repression that this family member grew up under caused them to be curious about things that they shouldn't have been. And yeah, I think led them to do things that they shouldn't have done, because it did eventually, after a few years, just kind of stop.
Mm.
I don't know if that's a good explanation.
Oh, of course, that was a great explanation. How did you break free?
I think I always intuitively kind of felt like what we were raised in was wrong. And I was told growing up that I was rebellious. And in this cult, rebellion is really, really frowned on. They consider it as bad as what they call the sin of witchcraft. So I think just naturally, I always was very in tune with my own soul and what felt right and wrong to me. And my siblings and I growing up, we would even joke about it being a cult,
What kind of
which
jokes?
now looking back, Well, we would just joke about the weird things that we were involved in and be like, haha, this is so culty or whatever. Like, it's funny looking back because it's like very ironic considering it actually was a cult. So I think on some level, like we knew, we could tell. And I always was a rebel. Like I was always sneaking around behind my parents' back and like doing things I shouldn't, like listening to rock music or watching TV, just things like that. I think as I got older, we actually left the cult a little before I went to college, I think.
Mm.
Just some things happened that made my parents, I think, kind of started to show the cracks in the facade and made my parents really creeped out with the cult leader and one of my other siblings. So we left the cult, but we were still very conservative and very religious. And then as I got older, and especially as I went to college, I mean, I always was a big reader, had a voracious appetite for reading
Mm.
books and words. So I think that was kind of not just a way for me to escape, but I think that kind of opened my eyes to other things and to the world and helped me see other perspectives. So I think that kind of started to change my mind about a lot of things and open other ideas up to me. And then I think it was just a natural progression over the years of me as I just kept growing and learning and reading and going to therapy. I just started like naturally distancing myself more and more until eventually like I didn't even consider myself a Christian anymore.
Yeah. And you mentioned therapy. How did you decide, do you remember the moment when you decided that you needed to go to therapy or that you wanted to?
I don't think so. No, I don't remember my first therapist or the first moment when I knew I needed therapy.
In school? Like, how did you even like get access to one?
Oh, that does remind me. Yeah, so in college I did actually I went and saw she was an intern.
Mm.
That was actually my first therapy experience was with her. And then around that same time actually I think my parents, yeah, they did send me and my younger sister to our pastor's wife. And that therapy was a joke, but I guess technically that could be considered my first therapy encounter. And then later in my 20s, at some point, I dabbled in therapy on my own a little bit more, and then really seriously got into actual therapy a few years back.
And how did you, when you first come to that, I mean, being a survivor myself, I actually did grow up in something not the same, but I grew up in the Seventh-day Adventist church, which is a Seventh-day Adventist cult, as I like to call it, which is very similar in the way of just like they control the way you dress, they control the way you eat. I was also homeschooled for much of my life from seventh or eighth grade through high school. And like we weren't allowed to watch TV or listen to the radio or any of that stuff, and it's just like this form of like control. And it felt like for a long time, I didn't want to even like uncover that stuff. Like I was just like, it just happened and I'm just gonna like live my life and I'm not gonna think about it. And so I guess what I'm getting at is, how do you feel you came to that realization of like, I need help?
Again, it was just a gradual thing over the years. My first boyfriend, actually, he
Mm.
helped me a lot. I told him all about my childhood, my upbringing, the cults, and he would point out the things that were very messed up or the things that I still believed or were doing that were like not healthy or not in line with reality.
Mm.
So he helped me a lot. And then after that, I think it was just going through life, dealing with some of my own addictions and things, I think really highlighted that I needed help and that I was really struggling after this upbringing I had had and
Mm.
just trying to cope and find my place in the world.
Yeah,
Um, I
yeah.
had no exposure to the world. And so it seemed like a really big, scary place. And I didn't know how to function as an adult in it. And even to this day now, I'm 32 years old. And sometimes I find myself thinking and feeling like I don't know how to function in the world.
Mm. Yeah, that's really powerful. You say like your first boyfriend, it seems like it's a hard thing to do alone, right? To like actually like go and seek help. And like sometimes it does take an outside perspective for you to be like, oh, wait, maybe this was a bad thing. So that's really, really great because that's something else I feel like we talk a lot about in Post Ugly is it's like you can't really do it alone. You need a community. You need people outside. So do you think you've built some kind of a community for yourself in that way?
Yeah, and I'm kind of in the process of doing that now because I did try to do it on my own for so long just because that's all I knew how to do. It didn't even occur to me to try to reach out to people. I didn't even start talking about what happened to me until probably my mid 20s, somewhere in there. And it was in my mid 20s that I realized finally, like, oh, this was actually a cult. And I actually started calling it a cult. And the first time I called it a cult, it was so scary. And I
Mm.
thought, like, oh, people are going to think I'm being dramatic. They're going to think I'm lying. They're not going to believe me. Yeah, I definitely needed community and needed outside support. I recently moved a couple years ago. So right now I'm in the process of building community. And that's what I'm trying to do with my YouTube channels, build community and find other cult survivors, other people like me who went through religious trauma or maybe grew up in the same cult as I did. Because there's definitely something very healing about other people who've gone through the same thing as you. And other people just offer perspective that you just can't get on your own.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, even just like through this that I've done, like I have felt so much healing and like just it's almost like this thing where you're like you realize you're not alone,
Yeah,
you
that's
know?
one of the most healing parts, I think, is just realizing you're not alone in this and other people have gone through it too.
Exactly. So shifting kind of back, I do have a question. Are you still close with your family at all? I guess maybe actually even shifting more back, did you ever tell your parents about what was happening to you as a child?
Yes. They know pretty much everything. I struggled a lot throughout my entire childhood, throughout my entire life. I've struggled with eating disorders. And so at one point, they sent me to treatment. It was like, I think it was like a month-long stay at a facility in Arizona. And at the last week, they had family week, which the families came down and we all did family therapy together. So during that time, everything came out. I told them about the sexual abuse and they never asked about it. It was kind of never spoken of again, but they are aware that it happened. And then maybe about a year ago, I sat them down and I had a FaceTime call with them. And we talked for like 2 or 3 hours. And I went through everything and I asked them every single question I'd ever wondered, like, why did you raise us the way that you raised us? Why did you never pay attention to certain things that were going on? I asked them straight up, I said, is ATI a cult? And they were very evasive. They were very vague. They wouldn't answer the question directly. And this is probably the second or third time I've asked my parents straight to their face, was this a cult? Did you raise us in a cult? And every time they'll kind of beat around the bush and be very vague. They will never, ever admit that it was a cult. They can't take accountability. And so, just due to that and some other things, just seeing how they treated another family member when they found out some personal information about her when she was struggling with some things, just seeing the way they handled it combined with that lack of accountability, I don't feel that they are safe people to have close relationships with at this point. We're still close in a sense, and it's kind of more so a superficial sense. But no, I'm not like actually close with my family. They can't accept me for who I am. I recently came out, and so that adds a whole other layer of non-acceptance and judgment on their part towards me. So at this point, I'm not close with them. I don't know if we ever will be. I'm trying to have peace with that. And yeah, just trying to make peace with that and protect myself with boundaries.
Absolutely. You talked a little bit about coping. If you don't mind going into a little bit about what are ways that you have found to cope, whether that be unhealthy ways at first and maybe shifting that into healthy ways, or maybe things that you're still struggling with, just kind of giving people an idea of like what your coping mechanisms have been.
Yeah. I think growing up, my coping mechanisms, I think I definitely used words. I think I disappeared into books a lot. I disappeared into writing. Writing was kind of my biggest coping mechanism growing up. I did a lot of journaling. I would write stories and just kind of disappear into my own fantasy land in that way. As I also, I guess, through childhood, I was going to say as I got older, other coping mechanisms I used, but I think also growing up, the eating disorders I dealt with, I think that was definitely a coping mechanism. And then as I got older and had access to other things, I definitely used drugs to cope for a very extended period of time. There was some self harm when I was younger, teenager, that I used to cope. I think now my biggest coping mechanisms, I think health for healthy, I use meditation. Meditation has been like my saving grace. As far as like unhealthy coping mechanisms, I think I definitely still struggle a lot with smoking weed to cope and kind of like using that to numb out or disappear. Yeah, I
Mm,
would say those are my biggest coping mechanisms.
yeah, for sure. How did you find meditation?
I found it first when I was maybe a teenager and just have done it on and off throughout the years. I only recently like really started getting serious about a meditation practice and trying to meditate every day. I went through some pretty big loss about a year ago. And so the only thing that lifted me up out of my depression and panic attacks was meditation. So
Yeah.
I definitely use that a lot.
Yeah, that's great. I love that. So, how are your relationships now, like with other people? Like, do you feel like it's hard to make relationships, like to make like to trust? Like, how is your how do you feel when it comes to relationships in general, whether that be romantic relationships or just relationships with friends or like with other people?
I think relationships are definitely very hard for me. I think I find myself kind of swinging between extremes where I'll either really trust people and be very open and kind of overshare, or on the flip side, I feel like I'm very closed off, very, very private, very guarded, very paranoid and distrustful of people. And I kind of go back and forth and I'm trying to find that happy medium because the cult that we were raised in, they taught us, the world is evil and dangerous and bad, and you can't trust people, especially if they're not Christians. Like, you cannot trust them. If they're Christian, you can trust them with your life. Like, it was really, yeah, very extreme. So, yeah, I'm just trying to find that healthy balance. I definitely struggled with romantic relationships. I had no idea how to be a good partner, how to be in a romantic partnership for the longest time. I feel like that's something really new and really fresh in my life that I've only started to understand. And I feel like I'm in a good, healthy place with that now. But yeah, that was always really hard for me as well. And I kind of still find myself naturally falling into the very stereotypical gender roles just because that's what I was raised in. So now, as someone who's come out, who's gay, that's very interesting because in gay lesbian relationships, there's not always that very defined gender role for each person. So that's been really interesting to navigate. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, relationships, they've definitely been tough for me for sure, but I think I'm getting to a better place with that.
Yeah, that's great. How's your relationship with a higher power or universe or spirituality? Do you identify in any way spiritually? Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely identify as very spiritual, not religious at all. I would identify as a pagan or a witch. I think that's the closest that thing that I align with. I feel like my relationship now with a higher power is in a really good and healthy place. I mean, again, it's a journey and it's something I'm still exploring and growing with, but I feel like I do have finally like a really strong, good connection to whatever this higher power is out there. I've always felt very intuitive. I think everyone is intuitive. I think everyone is psychic. Obviously, like different varying levels of that, but I feel very in tune with my intuition. I feel very in tune with God, goddess, whatever is out there. I have a lot of peace and a lot of peace with death finally, which that was
Mm,
something I always grew up with so much death anxiety.
really? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I was always just really scared of dying, and I was convinced that I was gonna die really young. For some reason, I had it in my brain that I was gonna die when I was 16. So I literally made like this whole goodbye video for my family after my death, which looking back, I'm like, it's kind of dramatic and a little bit funny. And then I think I just always had kind of this underlying fear of death after I made it past my 16th birthday. And up until recently, I had a lot of death anxiety. I think honestly, microdosing mushrooms helped me with the death anxiety, but it got to the point where I was having so much anxiety that I actually thought I was having heart problems and I was having panic attacks, thinking like, I'm gonna die, I'm not gonna make it through the night. And that was also around the same time that I went through a pretty significant loss, and just a bunch of other things going on in my personal life, a bunch of other losses in general. So I think that kind of all just played into each other, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and just I would think, with that upbringing of like, I mean, at least with mine of just like end of the world and like always thinking like this isn't actually what you want. You want what's up the heaven. You want like, the afterlife. Like, like I feel like they make you feel like this world is not the real world. Like, did you
Right.
feel that way?
Yes, absolutely. And we were huge into all the end time conspiracies. I don't know if you ever read the Left Behind books or watched the movies, but
Oh.
those were really big in our circle. And my mom would even tell us growing up, she was like, I think you guys are going to see the end times in your lifetime. So I lived with all this fear of like the Antichrist coming back and being persecuted and
The
all
book
of this
of
stuff that I did not need.
Revelation.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
All of that business. Yeah, definitely. Well, do you feel like you're in a good place right now? Like, do you feel safe where you are right now?
I do, yes. And that's something I'm really proud of, that this home that I've created, like so many times, like every single night when I go to bed, I'm always thinking about that. Like I remember all the anxiety and all the fear I would have going to bed at home as a kid and the night terrors. And now I've just created this home and this environment that is safe. It feels safe. I can go to bed. I don't have fear and anxiety. I can look forward to going to bed. It's just so different from what I grew up in. So I
Yeah,
do finally feel safe, and I'm very proud of that. I'm learning how to feel safe in my body. I'm learning how to regulate my nervous system. So I think that's all been really, really helpful in healing.
definitely. And, I've been speaking to different mental health professionals just about like, what we can do to feel safe, what we can do to cope, all of these things. And like, at least from what I've found, there isn't just like one thing, right? Like it
Yeah.
takes a lot of trial and error and it
Yes.
takes a lot of different things, like a combination. So it sounds like that's kind of like what you found through your journey. It's a journey. Like it's not just like, I feel like right now, especially in the world we live in, there's so much instant gratification going on where people are like, oh, if I do this one thing, I'm going to be better. But for you and for so many survivors, I feel like no, it's not just one thing. And it actually does take a lot of time.
It does. It'll be a lifelong journey, I feel like. And I mean, yeah, it is so many things, even down to the most mundane, simplistic type of things, like what you put into your body, what you feed yourself, how much sleep you're getting, how much sun you're getting, just very basic things as well.
Mhm.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you have anything that you want to say to anyone who might be going through a similar situation that you were going through? Just like something that, you wish somebody would have said to you?
I think one of the biggest things I would want to say that dealt with personally myself as well is when you grow up in these type of environments, whether it's this cult, a different cult, religious extremism, or whatever it may be, you're very much taught and mind programmed to look outside of yourself for help and for support. And we're taught that we can't trust ourselves, we can't trust our intuition, that we can't save ourselves. We're always taught and programmed to look outside of ourselves, whether that's to some religious leader, some biblical figure, a book. We're always looking outside of ourselves. And I found myself doing this even after I left religion. I would look to either other people or therapists or self-help books or pills. Like I was always looking for like a magic pill that would like solve my problems or like fix me. And I had to learn that everything you need is within you. And I know we hear this all the time and it sounds kind of cliche, but it really is true that you don't need to look outside of yourself to be saved. No one is going to save you. No one is going to heal you. That's your own personal responsibility. You're not responsible for the trauma that happened to you, but you are responsible for your healing. And it sucks to have to fix all of these problems or mental health issues that manifested as a result of trauma that you were subjected to, that you didn't have control over, that you didn't ask for. It sucks and it's not fair, but it's so healing and empowering to take back your power and say, I'm the only one that can save myself and I'm going to. And to know that all the answers you need are within yourself, because I doubted myself for so long. And it was through meditation actually that I really learned like everything I need is within me. If I can just be still and quiet and go within and focus on my breath, you know, the answers do come. I also would advise other people to definitely seek out community and to just keep going. Don't give up, don't stop. There are people out there that will understand you, that will believe you and validate you, and who want to support you. There are good people you can trust, and those are the people to surround yourself with.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Oceana, for giving us your time and for sharing your story and for being so vulnerable. You know, I mean, I have chills. I have chills because it is such a journey, and it is so much about finding that stuff like within you and being able to really, confront those demons. And you're very strong and powerful, and I know that you're going to help so many people from this. So thank you again for being on our show.
Thank
um,
you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. If people want to find you, I know you said you have your own channel. Where would they be able to follow you? Where would they be able to see your videos?
So it's Oceana 333 on YouTube, and that's OCEANA 333. So that's my YouTube channel. And then I usually have my Instagram linked in each video's description. So you can also find me on Instagram at Witchy Fairy. It's all one word. I think there might be two Y's in Witchy, I'm not for sure, but then fairy is spelled Faer or Faeir. Can we
Don't worry
edit
about
that part?
it. We'll link it in the show notes. So
Okay. I'm like nervous, so I'm like, now I can't even spell.
no, you're good. You're good. No, we'll link all of your information in the show notes so people can find you and they can follow you and they can, learn from your journey, and you can empower so many other people. So thank you again for being on the show.
Yes, thank you so much. I appreciate it.